Good evening and welcome to another edition of Inside Government for the spring 2019 semester here at Cayuga Community College and broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon, Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, better known as ARMA, as well as Win 89.1, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. We are delighted to have in our studio today City Manager Jeff DYGERT to give us a city update. The city is in the process of dealing with several issues, as well as going into the 2019-2020 budget process. One issue has been that they are faced with is a slew of retirements of the Auburn Police Department and challenges in hiring new officers, as well as the expected closure of the Auburn landfill and possible move of the Auburn Fire Department from Market Street, the Market Street Firehouse, to Seminary Street. We'll be discussing all that and more in the next half hour. Welcome back.
Okay. Nice to be here. Thanks.
Last time we had you back was in the fall, and you've had 4 or 5 months to recover. So
feels like it was last month.
Well, does it feel like it was last month? So a lot going on. But let's talk about the police department, because that's kind of been in the news in the sense that you've had a slew of retirements. How many have you had of late?
I'm not sure exactly the number of retirements that we've had, but we're essentially right now, we're about 10 or 11 officers short in the entire workforce of the police department.
Are you surprised by the numbers?
A little bit, but those things, it happens. When I was with the fire department, we had turnover there, and sometimes it becomes a cyclical thing because of retirement.
Well, I was going to ask.
So typically every 10 to 20 years you'll have things like that occur, and there's a variety of other external reasons that happens as well. You know, just the work environment and
it's tougher to be a police officer nowadays.
It is, and what the local police department is faced with is nothing that's unique to law enforcement services throughout the country. Whether you look at New York State or you look at the United States as a whole, police agencies are having trouble recruiting police officers everywhere you go.
So for Auburn, you have to serve 20 years?
Correct.
So a lot of these guys and gals, not so many gals, but more guys in that time period. There was a hiring spree, as we'll call it, in 97, 98. A lot of them are maxing out. Some were hired even 10 years before that. And so this cyclical system continues. Is that 20-year retirement hurt the city when it comes to planning and financing? Not
necessarily. Obviously, this caught us slightly by surprise because it is a very personal thing to an employee, whether it's a police officer or any other employee, on when they want to retire. And some folks are very open and about that, and everybody knows when they're going to retire. And other people just decide a few weeks before they're ready that they're going to let somebody know. Right.
Or never.
Right.
So
they have to serve a minimum of 20 years of service in order to be eligible for their retirement. They could serve 30 or 35, but they have to serve a minimum.
And you are getting some of those.
Correct.
That are
yes.
doing 25, 30.
Yep.
It's about timing.
Right.
But the flip side of that is you have to fill those positions, and that has not exactly been easy right now because you have a lack of eligible candidates on a civil service list. Is the civil service list expired? Is it close to being expired?
The civil service list did not expire, but the civil service list contained, I'm going to say it was approximately 120 candidates. But for various reasons, sometimes people take the test but decide they don't want to take the job for a number of reasons. Then there's background checks, there's physical ability tests, things like that.
So you weed and thin out the list. So you're at a point right now, are you about ready to offer a new exam?
The next exam that will be offered, I believe, is slated for September of this year. So the New York State conducts those examinations. They determine the schedule and when those exams will be. And
so can people, I think I read somewhere where Chief Butler is trying to recruit people to take the exam at this stage.
Absolutely, absolutely. We always reach out. We'd certainly like to see a great cross-section of our local community. We don't always get that. We don't always get a lot of local candidates. If you look at the overall makeup of the eligible list, there's some folks from outlying areas as well.
So you are starting to look at laterals, which are individuals right. who are with other departments and come here. So I unfortunately have the T-shirt and the complimentary tote bag. The city tried this in the early 1990s. It went fair, and then it fell off the radar. So why try it again? Is this to have people ready?
Right now, we have approximately 10 vacant spots. We have essentially exhausted the current civil service list. As you know, there's a time frame between when we actually hire somebody off the civil service list who more than likely
So I do know, but
more than likely isn't trained to do the job. So we can't hire somebody normally.
From today hiring to getting somebody ready or on road patrol is
12 to 18 months.
So if you've got 8 to 10 slots, your overtime is going up.
Correct.
Which adds to other budget issues.
Correct.
There's a cascading effect.
Yep.
So in the past, the city has hired from the MTA, it has hired for the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department. Those are two who come to mind. Are you looking at laterals from where?
Well, a lateral transfer, to qualify as a lateral transfer, has to come from another qualified, certified police agency within New York State. So something from out of state wouldn't qualify, but somebody from another municipality, whether it be a village or potentially a sheriff's department or another city, would qualify.
And I don't want to get into math, but if you are going back to this issue of overtime, are you looking at overtime numbers going up substantially by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands?
At this point, probably in the tens of thousands, but again, there's an offset there. There's an offset from the salaries that can be taken into account as well.
And so when those individuals get a lot of overtime now, then they go into the retirement system. It's
at
a higher rate. Does that cost the city more?
Yes, not nearly. It's not like the face value of it, but
it has an impact.
It has an impact, correct.
So let's talk about other financing. You recently had your comptroller look at the next 5 years of revenues versus expenses, and what was the outlook?
The outlook is typical, as it always is. I'm sure you know the answer to the question.
I do, but I would ask it anyway.
And
you're the expert.
And you know, when we look at those graphs, we can make a graph look like whatever we want it to make it look like, but
so it looks like it goes from 500 to 1.8 million over a 5-year period.
Yep.
And that 500,000 is not for this coming year; it's for the out year, the next year.
Right.
Okay.
So, you know, those are all things, and those are tools we use to inform our decisions internally, and we use that to inform our budget process that we're in right now to say, okay, we need to tighten up here or there, and you know, maybe we need to increase a fee here or reduce a cost over here, and try to tighten that up.
So to close the gap, your comptroller outlined 4 particular issues. You can, like you said, you can raise fees, you can raise taxes, you can cut costs, but you're also stuck with a 2% tax cap on that. Is this a combination of everything over the next couple of years?
I think every municipality in New York State's going through the same thing. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a community, especially a city, that's not in the same situation, where there's the cost of maintaining infrastructure that in many cases has been put on the back burner for decades, and labor costs continue to go up, insurance, retirement, things like that.
So for example, you could stop taking on debt, but at some point your infrastructure suffers.
Correct.
And that's what got the city into problems in the 80s with sewer and landfill.
Yep.
So as you look at this, is that one of the factors you're looking at right now as you're starting to put your budget together for 1920?
We're taking a really good look at infrastructure. We're investing in infrastructure, which I don't think that has always necessarily happened. We have the capacity to invest in infrastructure without becoming a terrible burden on the taxpayers. We're trying to be responsible about it, but we know that if we don't do it now, the cost of emergency repairs, the lost productivity for some of our commercial establishments, and the potential fines that go along with failure to upkeep and keep up with the infrastructure at some point are going to outweigh the benefits of putting it off. So we're trying to get to things that haven't been done in a long time.
Duct tape, baling wire, and twine are not solutions.
I don't feel that it's a solution. At some point you're going to have to pay, and the cost.
But in some of those, you're trying to look where you can leverage federal or state funds to cover.
Or partnerships, or ways that we can leverage any sort of relationship that we've got out there.
So I just, before we came on, I was coming from Geneva, so I passed the North Division Street bridge. I can see some type of I don't know what, it looked like a scoop, but I don't think it was. Where are you on that particular project?
North Division Street Bridge is progressing along nicely. If the weather this winter had been better, we'd be obviously further along. But that project was pretty aggressive in the beginning, so even though we lost a little bit of productivity during the winter months, we're pretty much still on schedule for that. So the basic concrete forms in the river are in place, and when the weather breaks this spring,
that should be about June 30th.
Yeah, maybe. We're hoping that they'll be starting to set steel in there, and by the end of summer, that project will be wrapped up.
So you still feel that your end of summer is still the target? And
yep, got a great contractor that's been working with us and working hard to keep that project moving forward.
One other project you're also working with on the west end, and obviously the college has some interest in this, is you're doing some upgrades and putting turf in at Falcon Park. Separate from the weather, though that may be an impact there. Where are you on that project?
Again, another great contractor on that job that worked really hard to get a lot done while the weather was good, and we tried to squeeze some work in before winter hit rather than wait till spring. A lot of contractors would want to wait till spring. They were willing to start early, which is good because the long winter has an impact. We've got some crews down there right now actually working on roofing for the structures that exist. Those roofs were 20 to 25 years old. They were the original roofs, so those are getting replaced as we speak. And
they're 25 years old.
We're moving along. Yep.
So will the college? I know there was one story, and some people have said it wasn't exactly accurate because they didn't talk to certain individuals, including I think yourself. Will the college be ready to play ball down there for all their season, a part of their season at this stage?
We're hopeful that we get them on for part of the season. Okay. If we could get them on for the entire season, that would be great. Not sure exactly how that's going to work out.
Double days, you don't see any problem with that at all?
Absolutely not, and that was the agreement right from the beginning, is because of all of the other things that are related to that franchise, we had to make sure that the double days were going to be able to play there.
So you're the czar of baseball locally.
Yeah.
It's a title you love.
Yeah. Ultimate authority.
Ultimate authority.
Yes.
You've had two employees, Shane Truman and Andy Collier, who are well received in the community that moved on to other jobs. Have you gone through the process of replacing them?
We've got some replacements in there. They're not full-time replacements. We've got some folks working part-time there. And one is an intern from last year who has some experience and was able to hit the ground running, already knows the ropes. And another gentleman that was also there last year, and they're stepping in a part-time role right now, which helps us financially. And as long as they can keep up with the workload in that capacity, and then once the season kicks off, or approximately a month before the season, they'll move up into like a full-time status to deal with the increased workload as we get into the season.
So as far as you're concerned, there's been some seamless transition in the sense that you have staff to do the work that needs to be done
Yeah, it was certainly, certainly there's a little catching up period, and everybody getting acquainted with what goes on. Shane and Andy did a fantastic job down there on a number of different levels, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that they left, but they went on to better things for themselves, and that's good.
And one thing that should be said, and I know you were at the hot stove dinner. They were in the transition right there, but you would never have known it. They were there as team players, no pun intended. They were cheerleading for the team, even though they were leaving the organization.
And I've continued to communicate occasionally with both of them, and they're still on board. They're still great supporters of the Auburn Double Days, and you can't ask for more than that when somebody decides to take another opportunity, that they still have a good relationship. So,
where are you right now in your budget process?
We are just going through, our department heads have formulated their proposed budgets, and this week the comptroller and I are starting to where we sit down with each individual department head and scrutinize their budget proposals.
So you're about a little over 4 months roughly before the budget starts. It's July 1st, correct?
Yep.
Has the city council at this stage given you any parameters other than they don't want a large tax increase and
There
don't
you
cut a
go.
lot of programs.
There you go.
Exactly. But they haven't gone to the nitty-gritty yet, have they?
No, they haven't been presented with anything, and I'm trying to remember what the exact date of that is. I think late in April we'll be presenting the council with a draft budget that they can peruse, see what they like, see what they don't like, see what they'd like to add or take out.
And we'd love to have you back before the end of the semester to talk about it with your comptroller or without. Okay. So one of the big features, there's not a big feature because you don't rely as much on state aid as you most likely would like to. The governor released his budget in January. How did municipalities like Auburn make out?
We didn't make out any different than we did last year. We really, it doesn't necessarily get hurt, and we didn't see anything additional. So it's kind of right now, we look at it as status quo.
So no real cuts in aid compared to, say, the AIM fund?
The AIM funding, that impact was more for towns and villages, cities. It didn't impact.
And I know the Assembly has been restoring that in their one House bill. But,
right. But for us, we're kind of status quo as far as state funding goes.
Do you know what your tax cap number is? Because I know we all say it's 2%, but it's not.
Yeah, I don't know what that is right at the moment. We don't have all the information to calculate that, and I hate to throw a number out in a conversation like this because that becomes the number. So there's some variables there. It's a calculation, and folks need to realize that it's not as simple as just a 2%. There's a calculation and a formula that's utilized. And that number.
But 2% doesn't raise, even if you went to 2%, that raises you less than $200,000. Correct.
Correct.
And that
rough figure is every percent is about $100,000, but not quite.
And then that is in itself, you're starting with a gap, as all organizations do, because you've got labor agreements and debt servicing and all that those other items. You're always starting off with a gap anyway.
Yeah, pretty much everything in our environment is moving at a pace faster and bigger than that 2%.
So you expect to release the budget at the end of April, and when do you want to have it adopted by?
We'd aim for mid to late May to adopt, so that gives us a few weeks to discuss things, and in that time, after the draft budget's proposed to the council, each of our department heads will come in, they'll do a presentation to council to talk about their operation, maybe about some things. They'll make a final pitch to the council based on things maybe that they wanted that I cut.
No, that never happened.
Try to win the council over on a few things. So, and that's.
But one of the luxuries you have right now is that this will be, in essence, because of the way council is currently set up, you have all 5 members have been through the process at least 3 times at this stage.
Right, right.
This will be the 4th for the Mr. Genatino and Ms. Carbajal, I think.
Right, and we've established a process, and we've stuck to that process and that timeline essentially for the last 3 or 4 years. It works. It seems to have worked well, and it keeps everybody on track. Keeps me on track, the department heads on track, and the council on track for what has to be done.
So a big piece of your budget is public works, mostly the 3rd largest after police and fire.
Right. Yep.
Or fire and police, if I'm going in order, if I remember correctly. You only have, you were told last month by Mike Talbot, your Department of Public Works director, that you have about only 2 more useful years left on the landfill.
Right.
So for those of us who've been around for a while, we've been hearing that for about 25 years.
Yep.
So why is it 2 years?
Well, we are regulated, right? So
and I'm not saying I don't believe Mike Talbot, who I went to school with, but it has
so
been
we're regulated on
about
the amount of, it's based on airspace, as you know, and after a while those piles get so big and we consume all the available airspace. So without changing the footprint of the landfill, which we're not able.
And that is what has been done in the past.
Right, but we were able to expand the footprint of the landfill within the confines of the property that the city owns. In order to expand any more, we would have to acquire more property, which doesn't really seem feasible. One of the other things that would happen is it would have to almost practically and literally cross the river or the outlet in that area. So that's not a very
from
feasible
an environmental point of view.
Right.
And there's also the option of going into another township, but you have to have that township agree to this.
Right.
And Troop has not exactly been a big supporter of the landfill. As a general overall, they don't like it next door to them.
Correct. understandably, right?
Right, no, I'm
understandably.
not disagreeing, but the supervisor after supervisor has said the same thing. They do not want it extended into the town.
And beyond that, because I certainly don't want that to sound as though we don't have a good working relationship with a particular town, but there's other issues beyond that, and some of those issues are to expand a landfill costs a huge sum of money. Between getting the actual permits to do it, it's a lengthy process, it's costly, and the landfill business is changing, and we're a small landfill. It's hard to compete.
Everything from recyclables onwards.
Recyclables right now is a huge problem all across the country. It costs us money to recycle.
So if you only have 2 years left, what is going to occur, and what are you and staff recommending to the City Council?
So we've got a plan in place. The details still have to be worked out, but essentially what will happen is there will be we call it a transfer station. I believe the DEC refers to it as a convenience station because of the volume of trash that runs through it.
But a new facility to take trash.
Yep, there'll be a new facility, and really a resident of the city of Auburn won't see a difference.
So you're still going to pick up at my house on up on this end of town. You're going to pick up my trash. My trucks are going to go there.
Depends on how the rest of this interview goes.
Okay. Yeah. Are my rates going to go up? Because you still have some costs.
We don't anticipate a major change in rates. At this point, we don't anticipate a change in rates this year. We're not working that in right at the moment. There's some savings on one side, some costs on the other side, but to your point, homeowner isn't going to the big orange truck's going to come by same day of the week, more than likely, pick up their trash. If they decide they want to go to the landfill themselves, that's really the reason we're putting the convenience station in, or the transfer station, is to allow people the ability to do that. We won't allow contract haulers to do that.
And you're starting to do away with that now. Some services you are starting to cut back to save what space you have.
We need to, right now, we're trying to be conservative about the amount of airspace we have left. In Mike Talbot's presentation, he talked about the fact that, yes, we have 2 years left, but that's if we're poking every last little hole.
Yeah, I thought he said he wanted to reduce usage by about 50%.
Correct.
And so the big things are out-of-town haulers, those who are bringing construction debris.
Correct.
So even, I want to take just a giant step back for a second. You close the landfill, that does not mean that all of your costs are finished. You have some debt service.
We have post-closure costs that are regulated by our...
Got to cap it, you got to monitor it.
Got to cap it, you have to monitor it, have to control the release of methane. Yeah, so for the foreseeable future, for my lifetime, your lifetime, most anybody that's watching this, their lifetime, there are post-closure costs.
So this is not a 2 or 3 year, this is 10, 20, 30 years?
Decades.
Okay.
Decades.
So the transfer station, where likely will you put it?
More than likely it'll be adjacent to the recycling facility right now. So there's a little building down there for recycling.
So it'll still stay on North Division?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And any idea how much it's going to cost?
We're anticipating around $500,000.
And will you have it built before you get to closure?
Yes, we're working on bid documents now. We're hoping that by late summer or sometime in the fall, that facility's up and operational, and that way that gives us a little bit of wiggle room as we close the landfill down.
So one of the conversations or pieces that Mr. Talbot also brought up was he's looking at also places to bring trash and solid waste, looking at Rochester. Any reason why you're not looking at Seneca Meadows?
All those things are on the table.
Okay, so there's no decision?
No decision's been made, and that becomes a negotiation issue at that point. So, you know, our closest are Seneca Meadows. We have Ontario Landfill, and then there's another one in Rochester.
I wanted to ask you, we had Stephanie DeVito and Courtney Casper on the other day. They talked about the visitor center. It's up and running. Did it come in on budget and on time? It's
slightly under budget. It is essentially on time. We've got some work that we're going to wrap up in the spring when the weather breaks, hopefully prior to Memorial Day. But we have some plans to, we have, obviously, if you've been around that area. Lincoln Street in front of the center is a little bit rough right now, but that will be resurfaced.
Every place is a little rough right now.
Go easy. And William Street will get resurfaced as part of that, as well as we have other plans for upgrades to the parking garage that were weather dependent and budget dependent, but we're confident we'll be able to get those.
So all of these costs have been paid for by the state, with the exception of the acquisition and some minor design costs. So
correct.
Out of pocket, minimal?
Yeah, a couple $100,000.
Okay, and that in a budget of how much?
Well, it's over a $10 million budget total.
That's minimal for that. Right. So the bid is operating the center right now. Do you expect them to continue to operate the center?
That's what our expectation is.
So you're in negotiations right now, because their original agreement was 9 months?
I don't recall.
6 to 9 months, but they're about halfway through.
Right.
The state is now out. It is now on the city to pay. You've
got the state's still involved right at the moment.
Okay, but will they pay long-term costs?
We've got some, I guess what you'd call member item things that are helping to defray some of the operations.
Senator Helming, we're going to have her on next month. She has gotten you some aid.
Correct.
But in the long term, do you have?
Not right now. We're working on trying to get some state skin in the game on the long-term operational costs.
But you don't know what those are as of yet. Last but not least, in 2 weeks from Thursday, you give your State of the City speech. Is this your third one?
I think so, yes. Yep.
What do you plan on saying?
We've got a lot of stuff going on. Lots of construction projects, lots of public construction projects, lots of private construction projects.
Will that be your focus?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good things going on. A little inconvenient for folks. I think this summer is going to be less inconvenient than last summer was, as far as getting around downtown, but there's still a lot of good projects happening. And personally, my focus has been trying to do what we can to increase the curb appeal of the city, whether you're driving into the city or staying in the city, making sure we're doing what we can with our parks and green spaces and things like that. So there's been a major focus on that and our vacant buildings and code enforcement to try to maintain what we've got and make sure we can be proud to be here.
I hope at the end of April, when you're ready to release your budget, right after you do that to council, if you come and join us and give us an update on that.
And do that.
We didn't even talk about Seminary Street or the Auburn Fire Department.
We can pick up on that.
We can pick up on that.
We'll have better information by then.
Well, by that time it will be to the state, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So, well, we want to thank our guest, City Manager Jeff DYGERT, for joining us today to give us a city update. And again, we hope he'll be back here in about a month and a half to give us a update on the city budget, which is due on July 1st. We'll be back in just a moment with Beyond the Front Page with Cuyahoga County Planning Director Steve Lynch, as well as Kiva Vandergeest, who will be discussing this week's input session on Emerson Park. Quick programming note, the college goes on spring break the end of this week for a well-deserved rest for our students, and we'll be returning to our normal schedule of programs on Tuesday, April 2nd. Before we go, though, we would like to let you know that you can send us your ideas for questions or thoughts for future guests to Inside Government or Beyond the Front Page. You can send them to cozguytho@aol.com or Inside Government, 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cuyahoga Community College. We want to thank you for watching. We hope you'll stick around for Beyond the Front Page, but otherwise, have a good night and have a great tomorrow.